Hey, you summoned a lesser maker. In the hobby, there are several miniatures that I think are kind of a rite of passage. I've always wanted to do a Great Unclean One, and I've never. Nurgle is a little weird for me because the aesthetic seems a little vague, and I think I like things to be just a little bit more specific. There's another Mordheim warband that I like the aesthetic of, but it just kind of isn't quite there. It's Skaven. Um, and I know that's probably sacrilegious for a Mordheim channel to say, but they're just missing a bit of flavor. And I think merging Nurgle and Skaven together just makes a lot of sense. In a medieval city, rats often delivered plague through their fleas and the pestilence. So I think Skaven and Nurgle have kind of been a match made in heaven. So much so, Clan Pestilence has come about. I think if Clan Pestilence had been the warband included in the book, I would have been much more interested into it. So we're going to kind of merge these two ideas, Nurgle and Skaven, and the Black Plague, put them together and make an abomination.
Spearhead is a newish game that I'm not actively looking to play it, but it's if I were to play kind of a more mainstream game, that would definitely be the one. Mostly because you can take Spearhead and turn it into a skirmish game with just 3 giants. And this is my first one. I built this off of a Reaper Miniatures kit, and it was pretty expensive. So I think that's where my 3D printer comes in. So this is my new Bambu Labs printer I got with my tax return this year. To keep this cheap, I'm going to check out Thingiverse for a free file that hopefully exists to make this miniature look really cool. Obviously, I could start this miniature with an armature, sculpt this from scratch, but that adds a lot of variables I'm not comfortable with solving. I always like to jump into a project without much of a plan. That really falls through when you don't really know what you're doing. So we're gonna find a file I can 3D print to build off of. That way the proportions are right. Also, because this is a new tool to me, I want to push its limits a bit and just see how far and how good of a miniature I could get off of it. Yeah. Ooh, look at this here. This is exactly what I'm looking for. Something that looks different than the miniature I already made, but still looks bulky and heavy. I think this is gonna be perfect. I'm not a huge fan of the axe that it comes with, so I think if I take 2 of this hand and then I flip 1. I use the Bambu Labs auto tree supports for this, and no joke, they just popped right off the miniature as soon as it came off the build plate. I was super impressed with the quality of this miniature. Obviously, I'm printing it pretty large, but nonetheless, it's super impressive that the printer could pull something like this off. Printed off a rat head from a giant rat I sculpted a couple months ago. It was a little too big, but I did like the result I got from the printer. So I printed it just a little bit smaller, and that definitely gave me proportions that were better. So after that, my armature is basically ready to be sculpted on. I'm going to be using green stuff mostly, but I also mix it 1-to-1 with air dry clay, and that just gives me a little bit more bang for my buck and gives me a little bit more clay to work with. I sculpted some teeth before I went into some more of the details, and this was a really good practice to kind of brush up on my skills before going deep onto this model. I wanted to give this guy a Great Unclean One smile. It was a pretty iconic feature, something happy of being miserable. And then I added some rat fangs that looked a bit overgrown, and a tongue from a Dungeons and Lasers kit that was kind of Nurgle themed, called a nubble, and that gave me some really good bits to use. I wanted to do a mouth on the belly. This is another kind of common Nurgle trope. To sculpt on top of that, I used some tin foil and just kind of roughed out the general shape. And then I 3D printed some bells as well. You would like to grab this free STL, it's on my Patreon. And while I'm at it, I'm gonna thank my patrons real quick. Thank you guys for your support. I really appreciate it. If you're unfamiliar with my Patreon, it's really backwards. I would like to support your hobby. So feel free to grab all the free stuff over there, use it for your builds. If you use it and post it to Instagram, please tag me so I can see it. For the belly mouth, I thought it would be fun to kind of use the snout from the bigger print that I won't be using anymore. So I went ahead and glued the top and the bottom, and then I glued the teeth I sculpted earlier to those mouths and 3D printed a sword, and then I continued sculpting the belly. Now it's time to sculpt the rat tail. So for this, I used 50/50 green stuff to air dry clay, and it worked really great. Then I wanted to put another mouth on the shoulder so I could use some more of those teeth. I cut it open with a razor blade and just put in the teeth. Sculpting fur at this scale was something that surprisingly was much easier than I expected. And I learned a lot with this process, and I couldn't wait to apply this knowledge to a new warband. After sculpting for so long with this amount of green stuff, I've gone back to a regular size miniature. Every time I work with this material, I feel myself improving. Maybe if you're struggling with something this tiny, sculpt something bigger, because most of us are starting on hard mode. If you're buying the material to get better at using the material, it's not a waste. Be brave, sculpt something bigger. I've learned so much from this process, and I think it's gonna help me a great deal when applying this tactile knowledge to smaller things in the future. I made a new handle for this sword to fit in the hand, and I used one of those 3D printed bells for the pommel of the sword. At that point, I also added the iconic Great Unclean One horns. I'm basically done. The last thing I wanted to do was add some more of those bells to kind of a flail type weapon, and I also sculpted the hand around the sword as well. I primed it black and I painted it with some pro-acryl paint. Now this isn't really a painting channel, and I don't feel confident enough to kind of recommend how to paint things, so we're going to skip that process to the very end. What I would recommend is that whenever you're painting, try something new, and you're bound to improve. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought about this build. I really love how this one turned out, and it's so unique and gross, and I love it. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a build for the warband as well. I'm really interested to see how that comes out as too. I hope you have a good one.